What's he building in there? What's he building in there? We have a right to know.
All right, welcome to episode 30 of Reframing the Narrative. Back at you in the Gay Area, California, in Jake's illustrious studio. As you probably heard in episode 29, we decided to get a few in the can and do some shorter ones so y'all can do what you got to do for the rest of the day. Short and sweet and to the point. We wanted to continue what we've started in episode 29 with just getting some rapid fire thoughts out there. And this is a really important topic that we're covering today. Before I jump into it, though, I do want to say, let's just celebrate for a second. Reframing the Narrative is 30 episodes old. Bum, bum, bum. Who thought it would have happened?
And actually, you just mentioned it. The last time we saw each other in person was when we really shook on the decision to have a podcast together, to co-host together. And that was a good meal.
It was.
And look what's happened since then.
Neither of us understood where this was going to go or how it would develop. And we have great viewers like you who are listening to us. We still don't understand why, but hopefully you're finding it entertaining. Listening to two guys shoot the shit, but we're having a good time. We're hoping you're having a good time. But that being said, no, this is a really important topic, which I know in my days trying to quote unquote wake people up who are the normies in our lives and trying to get them to see that they've been lied to on so many fronts. And one of those topics that will, or objections that will often come back to you is, well, if there's some big conspiracy, someone would speak up. Someone would say something about it. So where's that? So today, this episode is Where Are the Whistleblowers? And let's talk a little bit about that. So before we jump in, I also want to give a nod to Agent 131711, who we hope is watching this episode as well. But
Howdy, Agent.
Yeah, so we were just inspired by one of his articles that dates back to November of 2023 about how do they maintain silence, and it's a really nice article. I'd encourage everyone to read it. Certainly, we're not giving a book report here, but there's some good points that are covered about how is silence maintained? How do people who see what is possible or what's happening behind the scenes, why don't they just come forward and tell everyone? How is this secret maintained? So I'll just cue things up, and it's a really obvious one, but there's always the threat of violence or coercion. And as an extension of that, people's careers can and have been ended for people who got out of their lane and started trying to report up the chain or through the legal system. People can quickly find themselves in a very bad way if they start speaking up, even within their own ranks. So there's a lot of pressure for people in this beast system world that we live in to toe the line and keep their mouths shut when they're told to keep their mouths shut if they want to keep continuing to get the Federal Reserve notes put into their bank account. And the minute they start getting out of their lane, that threat of not having money, not having a place to live, to not having food to eat, will quickly put someone back in line. And so that's one obvious way that people are told and participate in being silent no matter what they may be seeing. But I've said a lot here. Jake, I want to pass it to you. Why don't you get in there and give us some thoughts?
All right. Well, essentially, it's a carrot and stick kind of methodology. So you mentioned the stick approach. There's the carrot approach as well, which is join us, and you'll, just if you can't beat them, join them. And there's a lot of money involved. And I think in terms, I think of something like 9/11. There's so many levels to an op like that, and so many different players had to further the plan along. They didn't all have to know the entire thing, but they had to play their role for it to be pulled off. So someone like Lucky Larry Silverstein, or Howard Lutnick, who is now, what is he? Trump's secretary or something, right? Howard Lutnick ran a firm that was housed in the World Trade Center and lost a lot of its employees. Lucky Larry Silverstein
Pull it.
just happened to have a dental appointment that day. Well, did Larry have to be a co-conspirator? No, but he maybe had a little tip of something coming. You don't want to be at the office that day. And by the way, when you purchase those towers, it might be a good idea to get terrorism insurance. Who cares? It's just a couple Swiss companies that are just gonna take some dirty people's money and re-launder it back to you, so you can claim 2 separate acts of terrorism, or maybe even 3. He actually recouped that investment very nicely with billions of dollars in payments.
I said, Elliot, if you don't help me, I'll never collect from the insurance companies. And guess what? He listened and he said, you know what? You're entitled. I'm going to get you the money. And in 6 months, he got me the $4.5 billion.
So you don't have to be Lucky Larry Silverstein to go along with that. But let's say there's somebody that noticed something on 9/11 that may have heard explosions go off, and it wasn't a pancake collapse from their eyewitness perspective. Well, how do they get the word out, first of all, right? You could be shouting from the rooftops. You don't got no platform. You don't have a megaphone. You're just a crazy guy on a rooftop saying, that was no collapse. So what? Your message has to be amplified. So media control, that's my takeaway from that. That's a very important thing. The local paper won't even talk about it if you go to them. How do you get editorial power? You have to own a newspaper or be able to influence the newspaper and buy advertising for whatever method is going on these days. So that's another nexus point, shall we say.
That's a really good point. And we know that the media is controlled and is owned by corporate interests of many different stripes and flavors. But that being said, it also really, when you were saying that, it made me think about in 2020, when all the malarkey was being pushed, the minute you got online and social media, or you got on YouTube and started pushing against the agenda, saying something about masks or saying something about the shots or anything related to that, immediately you were deplatformed, you were silenced, your message was not getting out there. The YouTube algorithms were making sure only trusted sources were being amplified through the algorithms. On top of that, though, the thought I just had, and it's an important one that I've put out there into the space at least a few times, but shouldn't we maybe question all of those big influencers and names in the quote unquote alternative truth community who were very easy to find and led us down their own paths? How did we find them so easily? I think some of our listeners know where I'm going with this, but it's a good example that the camera only points where it wants you to look. So just think about that when you start following some of these people, giving them your money, changing your lifestyle completely based on their recommendations. You should often wonder, how did they get so many followers? How are they being funded? How is it so easy for them to be part of the resistance?
And what are they selling? Do they actually profit or benefit? And sometimes they might be unseen because, of course, they could be under the table. They could be salaried employees of the CIA. We don't know that. But maybe they're pushing something, some agenda, and they profit off of that. Like the Surgeon General. She and her brother came out of nowhere, and they're suddenly diet, exercise, wellness, wearables, like this new way of being totally in touch with what you're taking into your body and what your biometrics are saying about your health. They're suddenly being interviewed by everybody. Kind of just like we're handed these alternative voices, and then eventually it might not come out right away, but they're selling something. And it could be just ideas that we need to be aware of. But oftentimes, if you, getting back to our previous episode, in your consciousness, you're not aware of something that you're being sold, then you end up consuming what they're selling you. And that could be a quick fix when you're not taking accountability for your life and you're not treating yourself as a sovereign creative force. Then you're looking for something outside of yourself and you're more easily falling into consumption, and you might end up like those of you on Rumble. You probably had to click through a commercial for ivermectin to get to our show today. They're selling you that. But you have to reach that level of consciousness before you will say, well, maybe I'm just being sold another version of some kind of scam, some kind of thing that gives away my sovereignty and control and could end up poisoning me in the end as well.
That's a really important point, that even if some of these people that many of us have looked up to as resistance leaders or heroes in some way, even if they're giving you 95% truth, it's that 5% of poison that really is the reason they've been given this platform. And it may completely slip under the radar. I could make you a 12-course meal, Jake, and it could be the most delicious thing you've had even in San Francisco. But if it's laced with arsenic, it'll still kill you.
It sure will. Yeah. So what other means of shutting people up are there? So we've covered a bit of the carrot. Another thing, getting back to 9/11, that I would say that other people can play roles, like in the insider trading, there was missing gold and silver. So people like that were in positions, maybe they had control over the Port Authority. Maybe there were a lot of financial, a lot of windfalls to have as a result of the panic and the people shorted stocks and made a whole bunch of money and things like that. So those people aren't going to speak. So that's kind of the carrot. But I think there's probably a lot more sticks. And then there's also one thing that Agent gets into is basically just from the beginning, kind of creating everything and putting the actors in place, even maybe using green screen and CGI in a lot of cases. Do you want to mention what's your favorite on that menu?
Well, yeah, and I suppose I'll circle
no
back.
Arsenic, please.
Yeah, I'll circle back to the stick a little bit, but you do bring up a good point, and Agent did in his series as well. Creating a fake reality entirely is definitely on the menu for many of the events that we've seen on TV, which are completely fictional, or at least partially fictional. So you've got the green screen actors.
She also works at Brigham and Women's Hospital. So you were at Massachusetts General Monday. What happened?
Oh, it was a horrific day. We had no idea what was coming.
You've got the crisis actors. You've got people who are involved in some way, and they're getting paid to be an instigator or whatever the case may be. But you had to ask, what's my favorite example of creating fake reality? And of course, it's our not so good friends at NASA, who have been caught many times with green screen bloopers, shall we say. And obviously they're selling the idea to the public that we live on a spinning ball and are hurling through space in a meaningless world and galaxy. And that enough is sufficient to fracture the mind and get it compliant to overall agendas of the New World Order. But that being said, yeah, I think that there's definitely a component of, why would you let real life play out that has so many variables and so many things that could happen outside of your agenda? So why not create that reality, have actors, have backgrounds, have scripts that people are following? Why even risk letting someone be involved and be a human who may say the wrong thing, or at least the perceived wrong thing?
I think we're getting to that stage where they're not even going to need human actors, and they're not even going to, if you have the channel, if you have control over that media and the eyeballs are magnetized to it, then you don't even need human actors to have to coerce or bribe or threaten or just reward for going along and reading their lines. And that was actually a bit of what the actor strike was about, and that's a good thing. So for the time being, we still have people of flesh and blood that are on our fake screens But another thing that I was thinking of is just once, like their agent's article had a couple videos from a man who was trying to get the word out about chemtrails and had experienced tremendous harassment. Now, you might get to the point where they raid your house. Well, what does that look like when the police with their sirens going? It's going to be 3 a.m., of course, because they want to make a scene. 3 a.m., they come screaming in your neighborhood. They block off all the traffic. Their lights are flashing. They might have a megaphone. They're like, come out, blah, blah, blah. You might be the most innocent guy in the world, but what's the appearance? You're suddenly the crazy guy. Some neighbor comes by, what's going on? Well, I hear they're looking for a murderer. I hear they're looking for drugs. I hear the guy was cooking meth. There's tweaking going on. Whatever it is, like they can publicly shame you and they can go after you legally through legal means. Even if the end result is not even a conviction, they can put you through hell because those levers of coercion and control are in their hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only can you be shamed and have your career ruined, but you can also lose your life in the process. And we've seen many examples of that. We actually talked about that when we covered the Franklin scandal with Ryan, that there were people who saw too much and had accidents along the way, including
Gary Caradori.
Yeah, exactly. And there's many examples of that where even Agent in his series about Uvalde had detailed how there were runs on his life and there was harassment at work and there was, even messing with his home life and fake dating profiles being put up. When you get under the radar or you get onto the radar of the wrong people behind the scenes, they can literally wreak havoc with your life. And it can be very apparent very quickly that you either stay silent or this continues and gets worse. So how many people are brave enough to continue down the path to say, I'm going to continue speaking the truth no matter what? And actually, I want to just give a quick plug to Medicine Girl and her recent article on comedians who many of us have been conditioned to think there's a handful of these comedians who are speaking truth to power, but are in fact part of the system that is designed.
Court jesters, yeah.
The court jesters, that's right. And so even people that we've heralded, like George Carlin, for example, he's spoken a lot of truths that we know inherently to be true, but he was sort of mocking his audience, knowing that he's in the club and telling him, you're not in it. And so even then, is that really speaking truth to power or is it amplifying the power? So it's a very determined person who says, I know what's going on and I'm going to try to get the message out there, even if it means losing my life. Most people won't go down that path.
Yeah, I think the means that are available are very effective in silencing people. And it's really hard sitting in a position where you haven't been subjected to any kind of harassment, or even if you have only been minor, if it's only been minor, to judge people who just may have shut up. There are lots of examples. I can think of some examples of people who are probably just silenced forever. Victor Thorne is one. A lot of people that are kind of new to this truth kind of consciousness. I'm picking my words wisely here. Might not be familiar with Victor Thorne, but he went after some very powerful and important, prominent figures and nation states and topics as well. He stopped talking, and then they got him. I think Christopher Bolin, who probably spoke the most truth about 9/11, as far as the players, you can go into the entire anatomy of how certain developments had to occur for that op to take place, and then who carried it out and who benefited. Christopher Bolin did, in my opinion, the best expose on that. That guy hasn't been heard from in how long? Probably at least a decade. So the people who do stick their neck out, or Jim Traficant, who was a truth teller in Congress, they railroaded him. He was in jail for years. So it's hard for us to judge. Even the ones whose voices do reach us, those are the minority. But in them understanding and the process, the harassment and everything that people can be subjected to for speaking out. It's kind of like what I like to say about the people who were in certain positions and they had a lot to lose in 2020, 2021 when they rolled out Operation Warp Speed. If they did take the clot shots, they have my sympathy, and I pray for their health and safety, and I hope they got the saline. But I can't judge them because I wasn't in that position. So I can't judge people who are in positions and don't speak up, and I can't judge people who have spoken up and suddenly go quiet because you don't really know what's going on with them.
Absolutely. And I think the other key aspect for us to cover that we haven't touched on yet is the profit motive. I imagine a lot of these conversations happen where someone approaches someone who could be a participant and they say, we could give you large sums of money for looking the other way or participating in a way that we prescribe. Now that we're having this conversation, you have two choices: make a lot of money or end up in a creek somewhere. Which would you prefer? I would say 99.9% of the people are going to say, I'll take that large sum of money. And we have to look no further than a certain school shooting incident up in Connecticut, where there was a whole neighborhood of people who had their homes paid off on December 25th, all at the same day. The only transactions that happened in the U.S. that day, all at the same time.
Yeah, lots of banks are open on Christmas Day, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. So how did that work exactly? And then you look a level deeper and you see how many people who had links to that incident who also won the lottery, or their family members won the lottery. A very unstatistical occurrence for all these people related to all be winning the lottery and getting large sums of money. And or people who start charities or GoFundMes.
GoFundMes, yeah.
Those people also benefit quite handsomely when you start adding up those numbers. So there definitely is a profit motive for people to take the money and be quiet, have their homes paid off, live a whole new lifestyle. How many people would say no to millions of dollars to just do what they're told? Not many. So back to the point. Where are the whistleblowers? They're threatened, they're coerced, they're completely silenced, they're paid. Maybe they're not even involved in the first place. Maybe it's all, at this point, CGI or crisis actors, green screens. How do people actually, if you saw everything, if you look behind the curtain and you saw 100% of what's going on, who are you going to tell and who's going to listen and how are you going to get it to the public? It's a really good question.
It's a question when we come across some kind of information that we're going to have to ask ourselves as well at some point, maybe. And do we even keep talking about things that may or may not have happened in Connecticut? Look at the example they made of Alex Jones, right? Now, maybe that case is closed as far as as public opinion goes, but with future such incidents, is there going to be somebody with as big a platform as Alex Jones saying that this was staged, this didn't happen, or it was managed? I give Alex Jones credit for laying out the various types of false flags. And so there's let it happen on purpose, there's made it happen on purpose, and there's just taking control of the narrative ex post facto as well, right? So he claimed that this incident was fishy, and there is certainly a lot of merit in that analysis. And they made an example of him. Whether he's actually going to have to pay out $1.2 billion, I doubt it, because he's now probably incorporated into some kind of a system. And he's been squirming a lot lately, just as an aside, with all this Epstein and Trump stuff going on, because he's really put himself firmly in Trump's camp. But anyway, this isn't about Alex Jones, but it's about the kind of example. Look at the platform he has. Is he ever going to speak up about a future Columbine or anything like that? I doubt it. And then, of course, there's similar future possibilities that other events, it doesn't necessarily have to be that kind of event. Will he speak up or will he spin it some way?
Yeah. And again, it goes back to the point I made earlier in this episode. Why was he allowed to even say these things in the first place?
Right.
My feeling is he was reading lines, and he was meant to put that message out there. So then later it could be discredited on all the major platforms, and he could look like the loon. He already has personified the loon screaming off the top of the ceiling or barking at people, making the frogs gay, whatever.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
Whatever your favorite Alex Jones story is. But he's a persona. And of course, they fed him these lines to put out there so then he could be discredited later. And that will just show everyone else that when you try to speak out about such things, you will get the full arm of the law for saying these things. So it really does create thought crimes in letting someone say something that then he has to backtrack on, and at least in the public eye have to pay millions or billions to rectify. So that was really an example put out there by the system to show you don't say such things. These things are not allowed.
Right. And he never once in the, I like to say, Norma normies land, from where they're looking through the Talmud vision, Alex Jones only appears on their radar when it's on one of the mainstream channels, and he never looks like he's a sane person. And so the takeaway from that is anyone questioning these types of events is a total loon. And then those that are actually questioning them might think twice because of what happens to someone like him.
Absolutely. And also, too, I'll just give an example of someone who did stick her neck out to dissect the inconsistencies of 9/11 and lost her career. Now, hopefully she's made enough money on her book sales, but I would have to doubt that that's a long-term lucrative position to be in. But Dr. Judy Wood, who wrote an excellent book called Where Do the Towers Go?, had a very comfortable lifestyle as a physics professor. She saw what she saw on TV and knew it wasn't real and started speaking out. By default, she gave up her career. She no longer is a professor. She is a lecturer and a writer, but I would have to guess that probably not making ends meet the way she did before. But she made that choice, and most people wouldn't. Most people say, you know what? Maybe I'll whisper it behind closed doors to some of my friends, but speak out publicly? No, I like my career.
Yeah, and those are the real life decisions that people make on so many levels, and who are we to judge when it happens to them?
Yeah, so I think that this is probably a natural wrapping up point for this episode. There's a lot more that we could go to in detail, but Agent did a great job of covering that detail. So why beat a dead horse with 2 stones and a bird? I just made that up. You can run with that quote. But that being said, I think this was a great discussion and hopefully helpful to others who may get that objections from Normie and Norma in their lives. You know, if they do call out something that's clearly fake or something that looks fishy, and they say, well, someone would certainly speak up about it. You know, maybe we gave you the Cliff Notes version, but Agent spent a lot of hard-earned hours putting those thoughts to paper. So let's just let him do his thing and encourage our listeners to do the same.
Yeah,
and
go look for that. We'll put a screen capture on there, but it's called "How They Keep Them Quiet: From False Flags to Chemtrails: 8 Shocking Ways to Maintain Silence." So we thought that would be a good springboard for this discussion. I think it turned out to be a really good one. So once more, shout out to Agent. Love you, brother. One of these days, we're going to have a beer together.
Absolutely. Until then, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for celebrating number 30 with us. And we'll see you next time with 31.
See you at 31.
You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage. You just have to raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, plant enough conspiracy theorizing that citizens no longer know what to believe.